want to keep the eyes open because we want to calm the mind. So this is not meditation. This is mind calming practice to reach some type of clarity. Don't try to stop your thoughts. Just focus on inhalation and exhalation. Slowly bring your shoulders up. Inhale, drop the shoulders and exhale through the mouth. Again, inhale up. Exhale through the mouth. One more time. Inhale up. Exhale through the mouth. Turn your head to the right, slowly. And back to the center, and to the left. Back to the center, looking up. Then looking down. And back to the center. Inhale up, then exhale through the mouth. And then one more time, inhale up, exhale through the mouth. Okay. I guess I will start at this point. My name is Professor K.A. Shakoor. I'm happy to see everybody here today. Thank you for coming out. And I hope that what I share with you serves of some use to you. This is a discussion based upon academic research of my personal experiences, which is primary. I have 60 years of personal experiences and literally 52 years on the conscious spiritual path. So I will share those experiences as I've seen the evolution of Buddhism in relationship to people of color, particularly African Americans or black people in the United States. I have, as far as Buddhism is concerned, I practice primarily Tibetan Buddhism, and more specifically the Karma-Kagyu system. But I have practiced and studied many different forms of Buddhism: Japanese Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, and Buddhism from Southeast Asia, which is called Theravada Buddhism. So I have experiences with many different types of systems. And before I go any further, I'd like to give honor to the first Buddha in my life, which is my mother, Elder Bell, who's still living at 93, who basically influenced me in this way. Because at 5 years old, she told me, almost like something the Buddha would say, I said, Mom, where's God? She said, God is in your heart. The truth is in your heart. And remember, human beings write books, they make mistakes. So don't trust any book totally or what anyone else has to say. Trust what your own inner self has to say. I was 5 years old. I just remember she said it. I didn't really understand it, because I couldn't understand what heart was. I knew heart was something, the physical heart. So she definitely set the direction and course of how my life has been, at least in this lifetime. So I like to say that. The purpose of this talk is not to get into the typical discussions of racism and blacks. That's not what this is about. But being a black person, and black people call themselves by different names, so in order to be politically correct, for those people to call themselves Africans, those people to call themselves African Americans, those people to call themselves Negroes, those people to call themselves Moabites, those people to call themselves Moors, and those people to call themselves Negroes and colored people. That's what I'm talking about, because different people in our race call themselves by different names or identify with different names. Personally, I just consider myself an indigenous black, because dealing with this posture of looking at things as they clearly are, people call people my color black. So as far as getting into all kinds of academic discussions with them, then I'm really not black, because black means this, I'm really a New Orleans, and I'm really this, that, and the other. Really, it's a waste of time. I've been through those kind of things in my life. And so I don't go through all that. So I live in the United States, which is indigenous, and I'm in the relative world, I'm called black. So I might think of myself differently, but so I call myself an indigenous black. There's been a lot of imprints done by the media and before the media, and I'm gonna pick it up at post-Reconstruction, the Jim Crow laws, that blacks are inferior. Blacks are maybe one step up from apes or primates. And in Jim Crow laws, we were called porch monkeys. 1968 or 69, they had to change the SAT scores that came out of Stanford because they were culturally biased, and those psychologists that had put those tests together basically believed that blacks were genetically inferior. So this has been an imprint that has been in this country for a number of years, and definitely in my lifetime. So Jim Crow laws ended in 1967. I was 12 years old in 1967. And my oldest child was 40. That means if I held racist viewpoints, I influenced my children to some degree, even subconsciously. And then they influenced their children to a certain degree. So the purpose of this is to show that people with black skins have contributed to the world culture and the world view besides singing, dancing, and playing sports and being clowns and comedians. Okay? So Buddhism in particular, and maybe Eastern thoughts in particular, usually not identified with people of color. And that's been for many different reasons. Primarily, most indigenous blacks in this country basically practice either Christianity, and by the time the 60s came along, maybe the most radical aspect of religion they would follow would be Islam. The Eastern religions that came into this country basically came into, not even all white people, but came into basically the rich class. So the first influx we have, Swami Vivekananda, if I can recall correctly, and Swami Yogananda back in the 20s and 30s. Might brought in the first wave of Eastern thought, also Hazrat Khan, the first Hazrat Khan. They came in the late 1900s, 1920s. And then, so you only have a small group of people that were practicing what we consider Eastern thought. Naturally, we know that in the late 1900s, you had Carl Jung, who was also influenced by Eastern thought. But, and others, Madame Blavatsky and Gurdjieff and others. But these type of philosophies and school of thought basically did not filter down into the masses of people of color. Maybe there were a few people that were in the academic aspects had some type of familiarity with that, but the masses of black people didn't. In the 60s, you had a massive social change, like something I've never seen in my lifetime. And it was probably one of the greatest periods that I've ever seen for those people that remember that time. And so what happened was you began to have a greater influx of Eastern thought. And a lot of this was brought in by the musicians and the artists. So you had one movement is the Hare Krishna movement, or ISKCON, which came in. And it was primarily promoted by the Beatles, because if it wasn't for George Harrison and all his money, you wouldn't have a lot of Bhagavad Gita's around, And you had Ravi Shankar, Indian music and what have you, with the Beatles' Apple records, which promoted a lot of this. A lot of that Indian music and Eastern music filtered over into jazz, which was very popular, especially in the 60s, especially in the black movement. You speak of people like John Coltrane and people like Miles Davis, and also another person called Sun Ra, which a lot of people might not be familiar with. So this was a lot of the influx of, this is one aspect of our Eastern thought began to come. There's a couple other waves in which it came in, but that was a major wave through the artists. And so what happened was, back in those days when they put records out, they had liner notes. So if you read the liner notes, the album cover was almost as important as the album itself, because it had all types of information in there. So a lot of people that I associated with, we listened to John Coltrane, for example. And John Coltrane had an album called Own that came out. I remember we were in high school and we looked at it, what was Own mean? Own. So we read it. So we started talking about Buddhism and Hinduism and Tibetan lamas and breathing. It's like, wow, you know. And there were many albums that he put out that was like that. Later on, his wife, Alice Coltrane, went on to become one of the first black gurus and a woman guru in the Vedic tradition. She started under Swami Satchidananda and then moved on. So Miles Davis, you began to start hearing a lot of sitar and tambura music and a lot of his fusion music, electronic music that started around 1970. And I remember Stevie Wonder had an album out in 1969 called The Music of My Mind. And he had a picture of Buddha in the inside liner notes. Later on, there was a group called Linkin Park. I think they, in their video, they had something that looked similar to that. It came from 1969. Most people are not familiar with that album from 1969. Didn't know that Linkin Park took that clip. I happen to remember that. But that was like me seeing an image of a Buddha. Okay. In Miles Davis' group, and I happen to play music too for a lot. 23 years of my life, I was a professional musician. I don't do that now. But being a person that was heavily into Miles Davis, he had a keyboard player named Herbie Hancock. And Herbie Hancock broke away and started an electronic group. But at the same time, he started talking about chanting. And then he was a Buddhist. And then he was a Nichiren Buddhist. And he talked about vibration of the chanting. And then a lot of jazz musicians that I hung out with and knew, some of note and some not of note, but I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of these people and talk with them, started talking about chanting. And I actually got a chance to meet Herbie Hancock and talk to him one-on-one at a club in Detroit called Baker's Keyboard Lounge, which is no longer there. It was a very famous club that many famous jazz musicians of the 50s and 60s and early 70s attended. And I remember he talked to me after one set, the whole thing about chanting, the vibration and what it does and all that. You know, he was a keyboard player, I was a keyboard player, so you know, in those days, it's not like it is now. Quote unquote famous personalities weren't separated from the people. So you could go to a concert and actually go backstage and actually talk to the artist and they would talk to you. Now you have no access to individuals. But during that time, you could actually, you know, go up to people and talk to them. And I was fortunate, or my karma, whatever term you want to use, I was able to meet a lot of people. And really, the conversation I had with all these people were about spirituality. They would never know discussions about music or any of those kind of things. And they talked about the importance of chanting. Herbie happened to be Buddhist. McCoy Tyner, who used to play with John Coltrane when I was on, he happened to be more on the Sufi path. Ahmed Jamal, who was another famous jazz musician. And that's all they talked about was chanting, how that changes vibration, you know. So this was a major wave. Now, and more specifically, how Buddhism became more influenced by African Americans in this country. Naturally, Herbie Hancock, I would say, was maybe the first that I know of, and then John Lucien. And it really took an explosion, especially in the Nichiren system, when Tina Turner in that movie talked about that she started chanting. You know, because most African Americans or people that are black in this country are influenced by the media, what goes on in the media and what entertainers do. That was one wave. Now there's a second wave. There's another wave, not a second wave, but another wave. And that wave is many, probably more males than females that studied martial arts became influenced through Buddhism by their teachers. So technically, the first time I did Zen meditation was when I was 8 years old. I started with Aikido because that particular teacher was a Buddhist, and he made us sit and meditate. And he called it Zazen. Okay, and many friends and many people I know were influenced with Buddhist philosophies, even if they didn't become Buddhists, because most of the teachers, you know, you study martial arts, you study with a Japanese teacher, a Chinese teacher, or a Korean teacher primarily at that time, you know. So that was a wave. Another wave of how Buddhism moved into the black community was people of Asian descent, particularly Chinese had a lower status in this country than blacks did. A lot of people don't know that. And Chinese people built the railroads going west. And I have a friend of mine whose grandfather was Chinese and grandmother was black. And that's how I first learned about that, and I began to do research and found out it was true. That a grandfather had killed a white man in San Francisco or somewhere in California back when they were building the railroads. He had escaped to Mississippi, and he married a black woman, and that changed his status. Also, during my lifetime, up until the time of Bruce Lee and Nixon going to China, most people of Asian descent were all called Japs. Coming out of the post-war period, and those people might remember that, in World War II, then we had the Korean conflict, you know, so there was a very negative view towards Asians. And coming out of the 50s, you had the McCarthy era, it was almost just like what's going on with the Middle Eastern terrorists. You know, any type of concept that was not Christian and Protestant, you were a commie and you were an enemy of the United States, for people that might remember that. So rock and roll was considered a communist plot, for example. And you know, many people think they feel that when Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and those individuals died in that plane, Dick Bopper and them died in that plane crash, that was purposely done. Okay, those of us think that way because rock and roll, when it started with Little Richard and Chuck Berry and what have you, when they played shows, they had a separation between. They show movies like this now too. They had a separation with whites on one side and blacks on the other side, or whites were at the bottom and blacks were at the top. And what happened was people started pulling those barriers down and was bringing people together. This was a problem for the military-industrial complex, or the people who wanted to keep folks separated. So they had to stop that wave. And then next thing that happened was Elvis, which was on a whole other direction with the movies and stuff. So the political aspects of rock and roll became more corporate and that type of thing. Then you had the wave, the British wave that came into the country. With the British wave, and we started moving to 65 and 66, this is when your influx of Eastern religions really began to take hold. So again, most of the Eastern doctrines went mostly towards the college campuses and to usually people that usually had at least 2 years of college education and read a lot of books, so therefore many blacks weren't as attracted or wasn't promoted in black communities, whether it was Vedic or Buddhist type of doctrine. Nichiren, as I said before, was probably the first type of system that actually dealt with the masses of blacks. And you had individual blacks that might have practiced Buddhism or were influenced by it because of martial arts. There's also another way, and I mentioned also the connection between the Chinese community and the black community, which I didn't finish. There's a reason why you see a lot of Chinese restaurants, especially if you go up in the urban areas in the black communities, because as I said before, Chinese held a lower status than blacks did. And I remember there was a Chinese restaurant in Detroit by a man named Stanley, and he, you know, made a lot of money, he was quite wealthy. So his brother moved out to the suburbs, and Stanley said, I never moved to the suburbs, I'm gonna stay in the ghetto with the black people, but these are people that supported me and stuff. And I didn't understand all that at that time as a child. Later on, I looked at it and saw it differently. Now, you also had the connection of Buddhism from black servicemen that were in Japan or in Korea, not so much China, but usually Japan, Korea, and Okinawa. So therefore, that was connection, and then you also had in cases of people that intermarried, you know. So those were your major ways in which Buddhism has influenced people of African descent as far as modern times is concerned, as I see it and as I understand it. Okay, there might be a few other things, but that's most of it. I get to myself. I'm going to give a general discussion, then I get to myself. So that's that aspect. Now, the reason why Buddhism hasn't really taken off as large as it could, and it's not necessarily the black neighborhood, but maybe in America, period, because we live in a very, this country is basically influenced mostly by Christianity, a Semitic style doctrines, which is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And those doctrines depend on how most people look at it. From a mystical viewpoint or a Gnostic viewpoint, it might be looked at differently. But the general viewpoint is that people that practice Vedic religions, where you have statues and pictures and what have you, are idol worshippers and shouldn't be associated with. That's the general attitude. So many blacks that practice Buddhism or were looking at Buddhism would never talk about it. I was one of those persons. I've been practicing Buddhism a long time, but I identified externally with one religion, but at home had altars and did readings and mantras and stuff secretly because I could not deal with or didn't want to deal with the amount of backlash that one would get for practicing these things. Now there was also another one thing I did forget besides those religions was also you had the Afro-Caribbean religions, if I can put it like that, Yoruba and other traditional religions that became more popular after Dr. Ron Karenga being one main person, and others came in and brought in the concepts of African or black people dealing with their culture. So you had the Kwanzaa and other types of holidays dealing with, so there became a movement. Dr. Joseph Ben Yankana, who wrote The Black Man on the Nile, and other historians, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Chancellor Williams, and others that talked about the need for understanding black culture. So therefore you had many blacks that, as they began to start dealing with traditional African religions and actually rejecting, because there was a philosophy saying that you don't want to practice Christianity, Islam, or Judaism because those were religions of the slave masters. So that was a certain type of philosophy that went on. So therefore, traditional African religion had many of the same type of components as Vedic and, well, at least the Vedic Buddhists and bone type of practices, because you're dealing with, in many cases, dealing with statues and idols and different types of rituals and more shamanistic type of practices. Okay. So that's been the main historical aspect as I see it up to this point. Why I feel Buddhism is important. I practiced Islam for a number of years. I grew up as a Christian from the time I was 13. I started practicing Islam and I evolved into Sufism. And I studied 4 major systems of Sufism, and I'm a mutlaq and a murshid in 2 systems, meaning that I can actually initiate and teach people and all that. So I spent a lot of time in that. I had teachers from India and teachers from Africa, and I had most of my teachers I had personal relationship with, so I was never, even with martial arts or spiritual practices, so I was never really like a group type person. Most of my teachers taught me personally. I had personal conversation with them, and I could talk to them and ask questions as I needed to. Maybe that was my karma, maybe that was luck. I don't know how it is, but that's how it was for me. So they all told me that, you know, Buddhism was the truth. They said, you know, this and Gnosticism, but Buddhism is the highest path for you to practice. But you can't tell nobody that, but we'll tell you that, you know, like that, you know. And I remember a gentleman by the name of Maahaah-Rooh. He was a guru, a teacher under Swami Muktananda, if people know who he is. He initiated me in the Shakti path, and when he touched my third eye, I went into a vision and I saw myself with gold robes on as a Buddha. He said, now you see the truth, but that was like back in the 70s. So I'm not going to tell other stories that I experienced, but that was basically certain things showing me the direction that I should take, or what the final direction would be for me. Why I feel it's important for me to talk about it now is for like I said, for general education, for people to realize that people with black skins have contributed to this world view, other than singing and dancing and being clowns or being criminals and thugs, which is basically what the media projects constantly, you know, especially with black males. So I'm very sensitive to that. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that all people are oppressed. Everybody is dealing with suffering, whether it's a personal suffering or group suffering. You know, I can speak personally, definitely being in a male body and being black in a male body, I'm probably more sensitive to the situations that happen with me, but I'm definitely sensitive to one of the major sufferings in the world is the abuses of women that go on. It's gone on for the last 20,000 years, according to my research. So, Buddha means to be enlightened. It means to wake up and to see things clearly. So what I had to do, and then I'm gonna get into some more history. What I had to do was I abandoned every book that I read, and for 4 years I just went to fasting and meditation for 4 months at a time, so that I could have clear insight. Getting rid of all the different things that different teachers and this person said and that person said, because you have all these different imprints. You know, and I talked about that earlier. We have all these imprints that are, you know, that impressed in us. And Buddha talks about the aspirations. And he talks about the 6 levels or 6 states of consciousness, the hell state. People that are constantly suffering and fighting all the time, and just raising hell all the time. We know people like this. And even if you try to talk to them, they, you know, they don't hear you. They don't get it. Then you have the greed, which is most nations on earth. Greed. The people in power, greed. Never enough. I got $20 billion. Never enough. Never enough. How much is enough? And so they call that the hungry ghost realm. Never have enough. On a more personal level, people that overeat all the time. Actually, a lot of these realms can overlap. Drug addiction could fall into that too. You know, no matter how much they, you know, smoke crack, no matter how much they drink, no matter how much they take whatever drug it is, once they come down off of it, they constantly need it because it's never enough to fill up that hole that's missing, that emptiness that's missing. Then you have the animal realm, people that is ruled by instinct. You know, you say something to me, or you hit me, you say something I don't like, I'm gonna fight you. I'm gonna come after you. You know, why are you looking at me like that? And, you know, who are you looking at? You know, it's this kind of thing. You know, people that put the finger up at you while you know, driving. You know, all these kind of things, you know. Then we have the human realm, desire. And naturally, in my way of looking at it, and these things overlap, because the people that run the corporation constantly need money. They use the media. I feel the media affects a lot of people. Even if you say you don't watch television. I don't have television in my house, I don't watch television, I don't listen to radio. You can say that you did it one time. I'm sure everybody one time did. So therefore, the imprint is there. You know, even if you stop doing it. But it's like this concept, and religions do this too, there's something wrong with you. And what Buddhism doesn't say that. You were born in